I never thought that a simple family drive could end up being the day I realized my son didn't love me. He only loved what I could give him. The moment I heard the engine roar away, I felt a cold gust run through my spine. I sat on that dusty porch of an abandoned farm, splinters biting into my palms as I gripped the edge of the bench. I watched the back of my own car grow smaller, carrying away my wallet, my keys, and every illusion I'd been clinging to for years. I should have seen it coming. But the part that really burned me wasn't that he stole from me. No. It was how easily he looked me in the eye and said, "Now all the inheritance is mine. You can just stay here and rest for a while," before driving off without a second thought. I felt a strange, calm wash over me, the kind that comes right after you've been punched in the gut, that hollow silence before the pain really sets in. I clenched my fists so hard my nails dug crescents into my palms. He thinks I'm helpless, I thought. He has no idea who raised him. Funny thing about betrayal. It doesn't always scream. Sometimes it comes in whispers, the little hesitations in his voice, the oversweet smiles, the sudden offers to help me manage my affairs. Looking back, every sign had been right there, lighting up like neon. But I had chosen to see my baby boy, not the man standing before me now. My eyes scanned the field stretching endlessly around me, nothing but overgrown weeds and the creaking of an old barn door swaying in the wind. No neighbors, no passing cars, no curious eyes to watch me unravel. But I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. I took a deep breath and stood up, my knees protesting under my weight, but my resolve firmer than it had been in years. Every joint ached, every step felt like moving through mud. But each movement pushed a new surge of fire through my veins. I didn't shout. I didn't weep. I didn't call out for him to come back. Instead, I whispered to the wind, "Thank you for showing me the truth." He thought he had won. He thought he had stripped me of everything: money, security, dignity. But what he failed to understand is that the real inheritance he should have worried about wasn't the bank accounts or the land. It was the strength in my bones, the lessons I carried from a hard, honest life. As the sun dipped lower, staining the sky a deep bruised purple, I let the last illusion of him as my protector die right there on that porch. I wasn't going to beg him to return my keys. I wasn't going to wait for someone to save me. Because love without respect isn't love at all. And in that moment, sitting alone on an abandoned farm porch, I finally realized being alone is far better than being used. I remember humming to myself in the kitchen, the scent of chamomile and mint drifting up from my herbal tea. The sun was still stretching over the town, painting golden squares across my old wooden floor. I'd always loved mornings like that, quiet, simple, untouched by the world's sharp edges. I stood at the counter, slicing fresh ginger, my hands moving out of habit. Behind me, my son shuffled around, pretending to help me pack a few things into a canvas bag. He kept telling me I needed fresh air, that a little trip away from everything would do me good. I should have known then. His voice was too soft, almost syrupy, like honey covering spoiled meat. After my husband passed, he'd sit across from me, leaning forward like he was about to share a secret. "Mom, you don't need to worry about a thing," he'd say, his voice low and silky. "I'll protect your assets, just like Dad would have wanted. You just focus on living a peaceful life." At the time, those words were like a balm. Fresh after losing my husband, my heart felt like a ship without an anchor, drifting wherever the grief took me. My son stepped in with all the right words, all the right gestures. I thought he was my lighthouse. But when I think back now, I see it clear as daylight, how his eyes would dart to the side when I asked about certain account statements, how he'd change the subject when I mentioned visiting the lawyer or updating the will. I remember the day he suggested I put him on my accounts, just in case. He said it so casually, like he was offering to pick up milk from the store. I was so exhausted from fighting insurance papers and funeral bills that I just nodded, too numb to question anything. He liked to sit with me late into the night, especially after a glass of whiskey or two. He'd lean back, his face softened by the amber glow, and tell me how he felt like the only man left to carry the family honor. I used to feel proud hearing that. Now, when I replay those nights in my mind, I see the gleam in his eyes. Not pride, not devotion, but calculation. There were small things, too. A slip of the tongue about transferring funds. A comment about selling the house before I'd even hinted at it. I brushed it all off, telling myself I was overthinking. After all, he was my son. The boy I nursed through fevered nights. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The boy who sobbed into my shoulder when he broke his arm. How could I believe he was capable of seeing me as nothing but a stepping stone? But that's the cruelest part of betrayal. It always hides behind familiar faces. I remember one night in particular. He looked at me over his glass and said, "You know, Mom, I'm the only one you can trust now. Everyone else just wants a piece of your money." I thought he was protecting me. Now I see he was isolating me. I see it all so clearly now. The sweet words were traps. The reassurances were chains. Every "Mom, I got you" was another thread in the web he was spinning around me. I used to fall asleep with a fragile sense of safety, thinking my son was my last fortress. Now I know he was the thief sneaking through my gates in the dead of night. And sitting here on this cold porch, every echo of his promises feels like a slap across the face. He doesn't realize yet that the quietest woman he underestimated is the one who taught him to fight, to survive, to read storms before they break. And I will not go down quietly. When he first suggested the surprise trip, I almost laughed. We were sitting at the kitchen table that morning, him drumming his fingers against the wood, smiling a little too wide. He said he had something special planned, something that would help me clear my mind and reset. He painted it like a healing retreat, a mother-son getaway after all those stressful years. He even joked that I deserved a spa day, a picnic, anything but that dusty kitchen. I looked at him, into those eyes I once trusted without question. My heart wanted to believe him, to grab onto that old image of a loyal son, but my gut told me otherwise. A heavy, gnawing feeling that coiled around my ribs and squeezed every time he flashed that forced smile. I agreed anyway. I wanted to see just how far he'd go. As we drove out of town, I watched the landmarks slip past. The church where I sang in the choir, the hardware store where my husband used to joke he'd spend his retirement, the tiny library I once took my boy to for story hour. Every building felt like a part of my ribs being snapped off, one by one. I kept my eyes forward, pretending to enjoy the ride. Meanwhile, he kept chattering on about new beginnings, about how I should let go of old attachments. He looked over at me, eyes shining with a manic sort of excitement. "It's peaceful out here, isn't it? You always liked the countryside," he said. I didn't answer. Instead, I focused on the way his fingers clenched the steering wheel, knuckles white. We passed rusted fences and empty barns. At one point, I saw an old swing set, broken and sagging, half swallowed by weeds. It felt like looking at a reflection of myself, abandoned, left to rot in plain sight. When he finally stopped, I felt the weight of his plan land on my shoulders like a wet, heavy blanket. He jumped out quickly, opening my door with exaggerated care. "Surprise," he announced, gesturing at the dilapidated farmhouse like he was revealing a five-star resort. I stepped out slowly, feet crunching on dry dirt. The air smelled like mold and old hay. He handed me a canvas bag, then yanked my wallet and keys from my purse with a speed that nearly knocked the breath out of me. Before I could speak, he grinned and said, "Now all the inheritance is mine." Just like that. No hesitation, no final sweet lie. Just the raw, ugly truth. The moment I stepped onto that creaking porch, I felt the wind slip through my cardigan like cold fingers tracing my spine. I listened to the sound of the car fading into nothing, and then silence. I looked around, taking in the farmhouse. Cracked windows like gaping mouths, weeds pushing through splintered floorboards, doors hanging on rusted hinges. It should have felt like a prison. Instead, it felt like a test. I held the canvas bag tighter and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Mildew, old wood, and the faint staleness of canned food long forgotten. I walked carefully, every step echoing through the empty rooms. I paused at the first window, looking out at the overgrown fields, feeling my heartbeat steady itself. He thinks I'll break down and beg, I thought. But I didn't feel fear. I felt an old, familiar resolve. I pushed open what used to be the kitchen door. Cabinet doors hung crookedly, some missing altogether. A broken ceramic mug lay on the counter, half buried in dust and mouse droppings. Then I saw it. A small stack of dusty canned goods shoved into a corner. Bottled water lined up like soldiers on a shelf. So he had planned for me to stay here a while. Long enough for him to move the pieces he needed to claim everything. Long enough to make sure I was too weak, or too lost, to fight back. I stood there in that ruined kitchen and felt the years of quiet obedience peel off me like old paint. The years of smiling politely, agreeing to let him handle it, believing that love could cover up disrespect. I opened a can with a rusted opener I found under the sink. It was beans. Tasteless, heavy, and exactly what I needed. I sat at a broken table, chewing each bite slowly. I thought about the days when I would make fresh bread in my old kitchen, the smell filling the house and drawing him down the stairs as a boy. Those days felt like a different life, like they belonged to another woman. When I finished eating, I wiped my hands on my skirt and stood up, moving room to room. In what must have been the old bedroom, I found a moth-eaten blanket. In the cellar, there were more cans, a box of matches, and a rusty old lantern. I paused and ran my fingers along the cool, damp stone walls, feeling each small scratch and groove. It was like reading a book in a language only I understood, one that spoke of survival, patience, and quiet strength. I didn't curse his name. I didn't scream into the empty fields. I simply took stock. He wanted me to be helpless. Instead, I was already making a list in my mind. What I had, what I needed, what I would do next. He thought he was leaving me here to rot, but what he really did was give me the solitude I needed to remember exactly who I am. As the sun dipped low and the farmhouse filled with long, slanting shadows, I looked out through the broken windows and felt a strange peace. That night, I didn't sleep much. I thought of my father, a wiry, sunburnt man with a voice rough as gravel, but hands gentle enough to braid my hair before school. We didn't have much growing up. Some years, dinner was potatoes and whatever wild greens we could pick from the roadside. But my father never let poverty break him. He taught me how to patch torn clothes, find clean water when the well ran dry, and set traps for rabbits when the snow came early. When my husband passed, those lessons came roaring back, echoing in every corner of my empty house. Back then, I didn't have time to indulge in grief. Bills stacked up like tombstones. I worked in the garden until my fingers bled, sold jars of jam at the farmer's market just to make it through each winter. I used to think that once my son grew up, I could finally rest, that he would carry the weight, honor the sacrifices. But sitting here now, feeling the cold floor seep into my bones, I realized something sharp and painful. I had raised a man who valued comfort over character, who saw me as a means to an end. A different kind of loss than death, but somehow it felt even heavier. Yet as the hours passed, that heaviness began to change shape. It turned into something solid, something hot. A silent promise I made to myself under that ragged blanket. I would not be buried by his betrayal. At dawn, I stood and stretched, my joints complaining but moving all the same. I looked at my reflection in a cracked piece of mirror leaning against the wall. My face was gaunt, eyes shadowed and lined. But under all that, I saw my father's spirit staring back at me. "You're stronger than any betrayal," I whispered to my reflection, my breath fogging up the glass. I moved outside, stepping into the morning chill. Dew clung to the wild grass, sparkling like tiny shields under the weak sun. I bent down and ran my fingers through the damp soil, feeling for firmness, the same way I used to check if the ground was ready for planting. I felt steady for the first time in years. My mind began to organize itself like my old pantry shelves. What can I use? Who might help? How do I get back? I thought of my late husband's voice, the way he'd stand at the edge of our small garden and say, Nothing grows without patience, and nothing survives without a little fight. There, in the soft light of morning, I let the anger fade. What took its place wasn't forgiveness. It was clarity. I stood up fully, feeling my spine straighten. The ground beneath me felt like an old friend holding me up. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about reclaiming every piece of me he thought he could strip away. And if he thought he could erase me with an old farmhouse and a few cans of beans, he was about to learn exactly who raised him. The next morning, I stepped outside just as the sun rose, its pale light seeping across the fields like spilled milk. The wind had softened overnight, carrying the smell of wildflowers and damp earth instead of rot. The farm felt endless, a vast sea of green and brown, with no sign of a road or another human soul. But as I moved toward the old fence line, something caught my eye. A faint shimmer of metal, the kind only seen when sunlight hits a tractor at just the right angle. I squinted and felt my heart jolt. There, hunched over a rusted red tractor, was a figure. He moved slowly, pausing every few seconds to adjust something under the hood. I didn't hesitate. My father always told me, if you wait for the perfect moment, you'll be waiting your whole life. I raised my hand and called out, my voice rough from days of silence. "Hello, over here." At first, he didn't hear me. I shouted again, louder this time, each syllable tearing through the morning air. Finally, he looked up, wiping his forehead with a rag, confusion furrowing his brow. I started toward him, each step heavy but certain. When I reached the fence, I grabbed the wooden post and leaned in, my breath ragged. "Ma'am, are you all right?" he asked, his voice wary but kind. I nodded, even though my legs felt like they might collapse. "I need your help," I said. "Please, I don't have a phone or keys. My son, he left me here." The words felt foreign as they left my mouth, like I was reciting a story that had happened to someone else. His eyes softened, and he stepped closer. "Well now, don't you worry," he said, reaching into his back pocket and pulling out an old flip phone. "You use this, call whoever you need." My hands trembled as I took the phone, the plastic warm from his pocket. I stood there for a moment, staring at the faded buttons, my reflection small and blurred in the screen. I dialed the only number that felt safe, Helen's. My best friend since grade school, the one who knew every scar on my heart and every stubborn corner of my soul. She picked up on the first ring. "Martha, where in God's name are you? I've been worried sick." Her voice cracked through me like a hammer hitting glass. I squeezed the phone tight, trying to keep my voice steady. "Helen, he took everything, left me on an abandoned farm. I don't know exactly where I am, but I can see an old red tractor and a broken barn nearby." I heard her gasp, then the rapid clicking of keys. "Tell me everything. Right now." I turned slightly, glancing at the farmer, who was quietly pretending not to listen, but stayed close enough to catch me if I fell. I described the landscape as best I could, the weeds, the broken swing set, the old fence posts. Helen promised to call my lawyer and send help immediately. When I handed the phone back to the farmer, I felt something shift deep in my chest, a tiny crack of light breaking through the darkness. He looked at me, eyes filled with gentle resolve. "You can't stay out here, ma'am. I can draw you a map to the nearest bus stop if you feel strong enough to walk. Or I can drive you part way." I shook my head, lifting my chin. "I can walk. I need to stand on my own feet right now." He nodded, respecting my choice without another word. As I tucked the rough map into my pocket, I turned toward the horizon, my knees shaky but my spirit roaring louder than ever. My son thought he had written my ending. But today, I started writing my own escape. The map felt heavy in my pocket, like a talisman. Each line and scribbled landmark was a small promise that I wasn't stuck anymore. I thanked the farmer again, his eyes soft but full of that quiet respect I hadn't felt from a man in years. As I turned away from the broken fence, I heard Helen's voice echoing in my ear from our call. "Stay alive, Martha. Just keep moving. I'm coming for you. I repeated those words to myself as I started down the dirt path. Each step felt like it carried a lifetime of weight. All the years I had spent waiting, shrinking, believing someone else's version of my worth. The sun rose higher, burning into my shoulders, but I kept going. With every footfall, I felt my spine straighten a little more. I passed twisted trees in dry fields, the land humming quietly under the summer heat. I thought about the first time I taught my son to walk. How he stumbled, looked back at me for reassurance. Back then, I would have caught him every time he fell. Now it was me walking away from him, and for the first time in years, I didn't look back. After what felt like an eternity, I reached the bus stop, a lonely wooden bench with peeling paint and a faded timetable nailed to the post. My legs gave out and I sank down, breathing hard, sweat dripping into my eyes. I looked around, hoping for another person, a sign of life, and there she was. A young woman, probably waiting for the next bus to town, headphones on, and eyes locked on her phone. I cleared my throat and called out softly, "Excuse me, can I borrow your phone? Just one last call." She jumped, startled, then looked at me properly. Saw the dirt on my clothes, the smudges on my face. She hesitated for a second, but then handed it over without a word. I dialed Helen again. She picked up so fast it felt like she'd been sitting with the phone pressed to her chest the whole time. "Martha, are you okay? Where are you?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I made it to the bus stop. I'm safe for now. Please tell the lawyer. Tell him to move fast." Helen's voice trembled. "I've already called him. He's preparing documents to freeze your son's access to your accounts. I also spoke to the sheriff's office. They're on standby if you want to press charges." I felt something deep inside me snap back into place, like a bone finally set after years of being broken. "Helen," I said slowly, my voice low and firm, "we're not just freezing his access. We're taking everything back. Every paper, every signature, every piece of respect he tried to steal." Helen's breath hitched. "That's my girl." For the first time since my husband died, I felt truly seen, not as someone's mother, not as someone's widow, but as a woman standing alone, unbreakable. I handed the phone back to the young woman, who was now watching me with wide, careful eyes. "Thank you," I said simply. She nodded, and in her silent gaze, I saw something I hadn't seen in my son's eyes for years. Basic human decency. I sat there on that cracked bench, back straight despite the ache, my hands resting calmly in my lap. I wasn't waiting for rescue. I was waiting for my chance to strike back. And this time, I wouldn't be quiet about it. The bus stop was so quiet, it felt like the world had paused to watch me breathe. I looked out at the road, each passing gust of wind stirring small whirlwinds of dust. I thought about everything I had lost and what I still had left. I reached into my pocket and touched the farmer's map, its edges already worn from my fingers. A reminder of the first kindness I had received in days, maybe years. I thought of Helen's voice, shaking but fierce. I thought of the lawyer's steady hands as he prepared the papers. And most of all, I thought of my husband's whisper, buried deep in my memory. "Don't let them write your ending." A bus finally creaked up to the stop. The driver barely glanced at me as I stepped on, my shoes leaving a trail of dirt on the metal floor. I dropped into a seat at the back, close to the window, and watched the landscape roll by, fields, small homes, mailboxes leaning at odd angles. Each mile felt like a stitch in a wound, slowly pulling closed. When I stepped off in town, the hot pavement stung through my thin soles. I pulled my shoulders back and started toward the small law office where Helen and the lawyer would be waiting. I passed the florist shop, where I used to buy roses for my husband every anniversary. I passed the diner where my son had taken me for Mother's Day once, years ago, when he still called me Mama, instead of the old woman. I paused in front of the law office door, my hand hovering above the handle. I breathed deep, in and out, and felt every shard of pain settle into something stronger. When I pushed the door open, Helen was already there. Her eyes met mine, wide and glassy, and for a moment she looked like she might collapse into tears. But I shook my head. Not now, I said softly. We don't cry today. She nodded, her lips trembling, and then she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. It was a short, hard hug, more of a bracing than an embrace. The lawyer stood up behind the desk, a stack of documents already waiting. "Martha," he said, his voice firm and respectful, "we've prepared to freeze all accounts under your name. We also have the paperwork to revoke his power of attorney and initiate fraud claims." I felt a surge of heat spread through my chest. "And the house?" I asked. "We'll put a temporary restraining order to keep him off the property until we sort everything out legally," he replied. I nodded slowly, each word a small stone in the foundation I was building under my feet. I closed my eyes for a moment and imagined my son's face when he realized I was not just alive, but stronger than he ever expected. The mother he tried to erase had returned with the full force of the law and the weight of her own unbreakable will. I opened my eyes and met Helen's steady gaze. "This is my line in the sand," I said. "From today forward, no one takes from me what I've built. No one." She squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt, but I didn't pull away. I turned back to the lawyer and signed each document with a clear, strong hand. With each signature, I felt the old version of myself, the quiet, accommodating mother, crumble and fall away like ashes. When I finished, I put the pen down and let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped inside me for decades. I wasn't just taking my assets back. I was taking back every piece of my dignity he thought he could buy, sell, or discard. And I promised myself, right there, in that small, sunlit office, I would never again let anyone decide my worth. When I stepped back onto the street, the sunlight felt different on my skin, sharper, almost electric. Helen followed me out, clutching her purse like it was a life vest. "Are you sure you're okay to go alone?" she asked, her voice tight. I turned to her and let a slow smile stretch across my face. I wasn't okay for a long time. Now, I'm more than okay. I'm ready. She opened her mouth to argue, but I shook my head gently. "Helen, you saved me. But I have to finish this next part by myself." She nodded, her lips pressing together like she was holding in a flood of words. I pulled my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and started down the sidewalk. With each step, I felt the earth under me like a heartbeat, a quiet echo reminding me that I was alive, not just surviving, but finally, living on my own terms. I walked past the town square, past the church where I'd once prayed for my son's happiness, past the park bench where I used to watch him play as a boy. All those places that used to hold warmth now felt like fading photographs, reminders of who I thought he was. I stopped at a small convenience store to buy a bottle of water. The young cashier looked at me with a hint of curiosity, probably wondering about the dirt still clinging to my shoes and the dried sweat on my forehead. I handed him a bill and met his gaze calmly. "Keep the change," I said, savoring the small act of choice, the simple power of deciding what to give and what to keep. Out on the street, I saw a woman waiting at the bus stop, the same woman who had lent me her phone earlier. Our eyes met, and she gave me a cautious smile. I walked up to her, lifting my chin. "Thank you for earlier," I said. "I needed that kindness more than you know." She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her eyes softening. "You look different today," she finally said. I almost laughed, a real sharp laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep. "I am," I replied. I asked to borrow her phone once more, and she handed it to me without hesitation this time. I dialed Helen's number again. When she answered, her voice rushed out in a flood. "Martha, are you all right? Where are you?" I closed my eyes, feeling the sun on my face. "I just wanted to hear your voice one more time before I do this," I said. "I'm about to take my life back, completely." Helen fell silent. I imagined her standing by her kitchen window, wringing her dish towel, her heart pounding. "Be careful," she finally whispered. "I will," I promised. I handed the phone back to the woman, who gave me a quiet nod of respect. Then I sat down on the bus stop bench, legs crossed, hands steady in my lap. A different kind of waiting now, Not the desperate waiting of a woman abandoned on a porch, but the steady, purposeful waiting of someone about to reclaim what was stolen. While I sat there, I imagined my son in his comfortable house, sipping his morning coffee, completely unaware that his world was about to split open. I walked the last few blocks to my son's house, my feet steady, each step echoing in my bones. I didn't feel fear. Not anymore. When I reached the front yard, I stood for a moment, taking in the scene, the perfectly trimmed hedges I had once paid for, the welcome mat I had bought as a housewarming gift years ago. I slipped on gardening gloves to avoid leaving prints. Old habits die hard. I knew where he kept the spare key, under the third potted plant by the porch, a trick he thought only he and his wife knew. I had watched him place it there once, his hands fumbling like a boy sneaking a cookie from the jar. I unlocked the door as quietly as a breeze and stepped inside. The smell hit me first. That sharp scent of expensive candles, the ones he claimed were too classy for my old farmhouse. The house felt foreign, sterile, like a stage set. My heart didn't ache. It hardened. I moved quickly, knowing exactly what I came for. I went straight to his study, the room he always kept locked when I visited. I knew the passcode, of course. His birthday, the one I spent 36 hours in labor to bring him into this world. I had earned every digit of that code. Inside, I found it all. The hidden cash in the bottom drawer, the documents he thought he had buried deep, copies of forged signatures, fake account statements, papers ready to prove I had willingly handed over my assets. I gathered it all, tucking them into my canvas bag, the same one he'd handed me when he abandoned me at the farmhouse. When I finished, I stood in the middle of the room for a long moment, letting the silence wrap around me. Then, I walked to his bedroom. He wasn't there, out late, probably savoring his supposed victory. I stepped to his bedside table and pulled out the single rose I had tucked inside my cardigan earlier. I left the house as silently as I entered, locking the door behind me and replacing the key under the flower pot. When I stepped back onto the street, the night air felt different, crisp, biting, alive. I pulled in a deep breath, each lungful tasting like freedom. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I walked with the slow, purposeful stride of a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to reclaim. With each step, I thought about the rose on his pillow, the way it would greet him in the dark, blooming like the truth he had tried so desperately to bury. Tonight, I didn't just take back my documents or my money. I took back every piece of myself he thought he had erased. The next morning, I woke before the sun. I sat by the window in Helen's guest room, watching the world soften from gray to gold. I thought about what waited for me today. The final step. The day I would stop being the quiet, forgotten mother in the corner and become the woman who stood up for herself, no matter who it hurt. Helen drove me to the courthouse, her hands gripping the wheel so tight I thought the plastic might crack. She kept glancing at me, her eyes brimming with unshed tears, but I stayed silent, staring ahead. When we arrived, the courthouse steps loomed in front of me like a mountain I had spent my whole life preparing to climb. I stepped out, pulling my cardigan around me, and Helen followed, carrying the thick folder of evidence. As we entered, people turned to look, some curious, some indifferent. To them, I was just another aging woman in a cardigan. But today, I carried storms inside me. We didn't wait long. My lawyer met us in the hallway, his face calm but serious. "Are you ready?" he asked. I nodded. I was born ready for this. I just didn't know it until now. We entered the small conference room where the preliminary hearing was to be held. I could feel the tension tighten around my ribs, but I kept my head high. Then, halfway through reviewing the documents with the legal clerk, the door slammed open. He burst in, his face red, hair disheveled like he had run straight from his car. My son. He stopped when he saw me, his eyes wild, darting between my face, the folder in Helen's hands, and the lawyer standing guard beside me. "Mama, what is this? What are you doing?" he stammered. I looked at him, really looked. I saw not the boy I had rocked to sleep or the teenager I defended at every parent-teacher meeting. I saw a grown man who had hollowed himself out with greed until there was nothing left but shadows. "I'm taking back what's mine," I said evenly. "All of it." He took a step forward, voice rising. "You don't understand. This was supposed to be for us. I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" I laughed, sharp and cold. "By leaving me to rot on a broken porch with nothing but a few cans of beans? By forging my name? By lying to everyone we know?" His face contorted. "It's not what you think. Please, just let me explain." But my lawyer held up a hand. "Sir, you need to leave. You've been served with a no-contact order, effective immediately." My son's eyes widened. He lunged forward, his hand outstretched like he might actually try to grab the folder. But security was already moving. 2 guards rushed in, catching him before he could get closer. As they dragged him back, he screamed, loud, echoing through the halls, "You can't do this to me. You owe me. I'm your son. You're ruining everything." I watched him struggle, his voice cracking under the weight of his own desperation. And in that moment, I felt nothing but a cool, final clarity. I turned to Helen and my lawyer. "Let's finish this," I said. As the guards pulled my son from the room, I looked at him one last time, not with hatred, not with love, but with the same quiet pity I'd offer a stranger who had chosen a dark path and refused to turn back. He had chosen greed. I had chosen myself. And for the first time in my life, that choice felt exactly right. After they dragged him out, the room fell into a heavy, humming silence. I sat back down, my hands flat on the table. Helen slid the folder closer to the lawyer, her fingers shaking slightly as she pushed it forward. The lawyer looked up at me. "We're ready to finalize the revocation and secure full control of your assets. Once this is done, he will have no legal claim left." I nodded, my chest rising and falling in slow, deep waves. Before we could sign, the door burst open again. This time slower, cautious. My son's wife stood there, her eyes rimmed red, her lips trembling. "Please, let me talk to you," she said. I turned my head, studying her face. The same woman who had once called me old-fashioned, who laughed behind my back about my useless gardening hobbies. Now she stood in the doorway like a child who had lost her way home. "You have 5 minutes," I said, my voice cold enough to frost the walls. She stepped forward, her hands twisting at her sides. "He made mistakes. We all did. But this, all this, it's too far. You're tearing the family apart." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed around us. "Family? You mean the same family that left me on a rotting porch to starve? The same family that forged my name and plotted to steal my home while telling me it was for my own good?" Her face crumpled. "We didn't know he'd take it that far. We thought you were fragile. We thought you needed him." I leaned forward, my voice low and sharp. "I never needed him. I needed respect. And you all failed to give it to me." She reached out, her fingers hovering over the table like she might grab mine. I pulled my hands back. "You only miss me now that I said no," I whispered. She froze. The words sank into her, twisting her mouth into something between a sob and a snarl. "You think this makes you strong? Ruining your own son's future?" she spat. I straightened my spine, meeting her glare head-on. "I'm not ruining his future. He did that himself. And you helped him every step of the way." She stumbled backward, her shoulders collapsing under the truth she'd been avoiding for years. Helen finally spoke, her voice steady. "She gave everything, and he chose to take it all and then some. This is not a punishment. This is survival." My son's wife turned and fled the room, her footsteps echoing down the corridor. I watched her go without blinking. The lawyer cleared his throat softly. "Are you ready to sign now, Mrs. Lane?" I reached for the pen. My fingers didn't shake this time. I pressed it to the paper and signed, each letter a quiet, deliberate act of reclamation. When I finished, I set the pen down and exhaled. It wasn't just ink on paper. It was my soul stepping back into my own body after decades of being borrowed and bartered away. I looked up at Helen, She smiled, her eyes shining with tears she didn't bother to hide anymore. "It's done," I said. She reached across the table, taking my hand and squeezing it with a fierceness that matched the new fire in my bones. My son's wife would tell herself stories about that day, that I was cruel, heartless, vengeful. Let her. Because finally, I was the author of my own story. And I was just getting started. The day they brought my son into the final hearing, the courthouse was humming like a live wire. I stood just inside the entryway, Helen at my side, my lawyer reviewing the final statements. We were ready. When they escorted him in, he looked nothing like the towering man who had declared my inheritance his. He looked smaller somehow, like a boy caught in a storm he thought he could control. Our eyes met across the room. He tried to speak first, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I stepped forward before he could sputter out another excuse. "Every lie," I began, my voice echoing off the marble walls. "Every forged document, every late-night whisper about protecting me. I remember them all." He flinched, his hands curling into fists. I kept going, my words sharp and unrelenting. "You called me fragile, called me a burden, told me I was in the way. But look at me now, standing, strong, and you're the one being dragged in by guards." His face turned red, veins bulging at his neck. "You don't understand. You're ruining everything. I was going to fix it all." "Fix it?" I laughed, cold and hollow. "You think betrayal is something you patch over like a leaky faucet? You think love is something you can pawn when times get hard? You never wanted to fix anything. You wanted to own me." The courtroom was silent except for the tremor in his breathing. "You told everyone I was weak," I continued, "that I couldn't handle my own affairs. But the truth is, you were terrified of me waking up, terrified of me remembering that I built this life long before you ever learned to walk." He lunged forward suddenly, spitting words like venom. "You owe me. You wouldn't have had any of this without me. You're nothing without your family." Two security officers grabbed his arms before he could close the space between us. He thrashed, his voice cracking. I took one slow, deliberate step closer. "I am not yours to own. I was never your servant, your bank, or your safety net. I gave you everything because I thought love meant sacrifice. But what is love without respect?" His screams turned into sobs, his body going limp between the guards. I turned away, looking at the judge, the clerks, every witness in the room. "He doesn't get to define me anymore," I said clearly, my voice steady. "Not today. Not ever again." The judge nodded, her eyes thoughtful, then signaled to the guards to remove him from the room. His sobs echoed down the hall as he disappeared from view. When the doors finally shut, I felt my shoulders drop, the tension bleeding out of my bones like poison finally drawn from a wound. Helen squeezed my arm, her eyes shining with pride. The lawyer handed me the final stamped papers, official proof that every piece of me he tried to take was now undeniably mine again. As I stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun, I felt the warmth soak into my skin. It felt new, clean, like a second birth. I thought of all the years I held my tongue, all the times I bent myself into shapes to keep the peace. Not anymore. From this day forward, I would never again trade my dignity for someone else's comfort. And as the courthouse doors closed behind me, I whispered to the wind, "Quiet doesn't mean weak.